America, land of freedom, or so they say. But for some, that promise ends at the color of their skin. Today's story isn't fiction. It's not dramatized. It's the raw truth that so many live with every single day. Imagine walking into a store with your child, just trying to live your life, when suddenly, without warning, you're accused, humiliated, and treated like a criminal. Why? Because you're black. Because you look suspicious. Because someone decided you didn't belong. This is the story of Danielle, a single mother just trying to give her son a normal day. And Caleb, a quiet, thoughtful 10-year-old who saw his childhood shattered in a matter of seconds. But what happened next changed everything. This isn't just about racism. It's about the strength to stand up. The courage to speak when your voice shakes. The fight to be seen and heard in a world that tries to erase you. Stay with us, because what you're about to witness isn't just powerful, it's necessary. It was a typical afternoon, or so Danielle had thought. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the bustling streets as she held her 10-year-old son Caleb's hand. They had just finished a quick lunch together at their favorite diner, Caleb excitedly chatting about his school day, his latest projects, and how proud he was of his good grades. Danielle smiled, feeling the joy of a rare, peaceful day. She loved these moments, quiet, simple, and filled with the kind of happiness that could only be found in the small, everyday things. She had promised Caleb that after their lunch, they would stop by a store to buy him a new pair of shoes as a reward for his hard work. He had been asking for a new pair for weeks, and now that he had earned it, it felt like the perfect gesture. As they entered the store, Danielle felt the usual buzz of excitement that came with shopping for her son, a kind of carefree joy that came with indulging him just a little. The store was bustling with customers, and Caleb immediately darted toward the shoe section, his small feet moving eagerly across the polished floor. Danielle followed closely behind, her mind still on how lucky she was to have Caleb, a bright, caring boy who made every day better. She was lost in her thoughts when suddenly, she felt a shift in the air. A store employee, a woman in her mid-30s, looked at Danielle and Caleb. At first, the glance seemed innocent enough, but there was something unsettling about it. The woman's eyes lingered on them for a second too long, and before Danielle could even register what was happening, she saw the woman quickly glance over her shoulder, as if she was signaling to someone. The air became thick with tension, the warmth of the store turning into a sudden chill. Danielle tried to shake off the feeling, thinking it was just her imagination. After all, it was a crowded store, and she was used to being unnoticed. But then the employee approached them, her smile a little too tight, her voice a little too forced. "Excuse me, ma'am," the employee said, her tone suddenly sharp, "can I help you with something?" Danielle, still not sensing the storm approaching, smiled politely. "We're just looking for shoes for my son, thanks." But the employee didn't move. Instead, her eyes darted to Caleb, who was excitedly pointing at a pair of sneakers on display. "I see," the employee said slowly. "You know, we've had some problems recently with shoplifting. I just want to make sure everything is in order." Danielle froze, her heart rate spiking. She could feel the weight of the accusation, though no words had been spoken. It wasn't the first time she had encountered suspicion because of her skin color, but this was different. This was public. This was in front of her son. Before she could speak, a second employee appeared, this one a man in his 20s, who took one look at Danielle and Caleb and then scanned the area. The air grew heavier as both employees subtly blocked the aisle. Danielle's breath caught in her throat. Caleb, oblivious to the tension building around them, continued to point at shoes, his voice a cheerful echo in the tense silence. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to stay here while I check security footage," the first employee said, almost too calmly, as if this was routine. Danielle's stomach twisted, a sinking feeling gnawing at her as she tried to process what was happening. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. No, it was something deeper, something far uglier. The accusation hung in the air, suffocating her with the weight of a system that had already judged her. She opened her mouth to defend herself, to tell them that they were wrong, but her voice caught in her throat. Caleb's innocent smile faded as he looked up at her, sensing something was wrong. He tugged at her sleeve, his small voice breaking the silence. "Mom, what's happening?" Tears pricked at the corner of Danielle's eyes, but she held them back. "Not here, not now." She couldn't let Caleb see her broken. She needed to protect him, even if the very system they were in seemed to be against them. "I'm sorry," Danielle said, her voice shaking but firm. "We're just here to buy shoes. We haven't done anything wrong." But the employee's gaze didn't waver, her expression hardening. "I'll need you to stay here," she repeated, now with a hint of authority, as if daring Danielle to resist. Danielle's heart hammered in her chest, each beat sharp and demanding her attention, as she stood frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in. The warmth she'd felt just moments ago, that fleeting sense of normalcy and peace while shopping with Caleb, had evaporated into something far darker, far more suffocating. Now, she was acutely aware of the eyes around her, other customers who had witnessed the exchange, their stares heavy, loaded with judgment and confusion. She could almost feel their unspoken thoughts like a physical pressure against her skin. There was no escape from the scrutiny. It was everywhere, tangible, inescapable. Caleb, oblivious to the growing tension, tugged at her sleeve again. "Mom, I want the shoes. Please." His voice was soft and sweet, a clear cry for something simple, something every child deserved. He wasn't aware of the storm brewing around them, but Danielle could feel the tug of guilt settle in her chest. How long would she be able to shield him from the harsh truths of the world? How many more times would she have to try and protect him from the invisible walls of prejudice that would one day come crashing down on him, too? She bent down to his level, forcing herself to smile, even though her mind screamed with frustration and anger. "Just a moment, Caleb," she said, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it that she couldn't hide. "We're going to get those shoes. Don't worry." But even as she spoke, the unease gnawed at her. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped Caleb's, trying to ground herself, but the dread pooling in her stomach refused to settle. Her pulse quickened as the male employee, the one who had been standing in the background, finally took a step toward her. His approach felt like the slow march of inevitability. Every step he took felt like a warning. Every inch closer seemed to tighten the noose. "Ma'am," he said, his voice colder than before, "I'm going to need to ask you to come with me." His words were clipped, devoid of any courtesy, the tone dismissive, as if her presence was an inconvenience. He wasn't asking, he was telling her. His gaze didn't even meet hers, a clear sign of the power dynamic at play, one that she was supposed to accept without question. Danielle's stomach twisted as she absorbed his command. A fire of indignation burned within her, but she knew better than to lash out, not in front of Caleb. She could already see the confusion in his wide eyes, his small face creased with uncertainty. She could feel the innocence in his gaze, the same innocence that would soon be tainted by the ugliness of the world. It wasn't fair, none of it was, but there was no time to explain to him what was happening, no way to make him understand that this wasn't a normal part of their shopping trip. "Caleb," she whispered, kneeling down to meet his eyes, her voice soft but tinged with an undercurrent of fear. "Stay right here. I'll be back in a minute, okay?" Her words were meant to reassure him, but they barely reassured herself. Every part of her wanted to gather him in her arms, turn on her heel, and walk out the door. But she couldn't. Not without consequences. Not without risking something worse. With one last lingering glance at her son, Danielle stood up, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her, as she followed the employee down a narrow hallway that seemed to grow longer with every step. The sound of her shoes on the hard floor echoed in the silence, loud and insistent. Each step felt like an intrusion into her own mind, as though she were walking deeper into a place she didn't belong, a place that was colder, more hostile. The fluorescent lights above hummed in rhythm with her heartbeats, flickering in a way that made everything feel off-kilter, alien. The hallway stretched on, and the closer they got to the back of the store, the more the knot in her stomach tightened. Was this really happening? She had been shopping for shoes, a simple errand, and now she was being treated like a criminal. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. She wasn't just being accused of something she didn't do, she was being targeted. The male employee stopped at a door at the end of the hall and gestured for her to enter. Danielle hesitated for a moment, her body tense with a mix of fear and anger, before she stepped inside. The small room was sterile, almost clinical. The walls were bare, the air thin, and the fluorescent lights flickered above them. A cold metal desk sat in the center of the room, the only piece of furniture, and behind it, a woman, the same employee who had approached her on the floor, was already sitting, staring at a computer screen, her face expressionless. Danielle stood by the door, unsure whether to sit, unsure whether to speak. The room felt suffocating, the silence thick with unspoken accusations. She could feel the weight of her own breath, shallow and uneven, as she struggled to keep her composure. "We've reviewed the footage," the male employee said flatly, his voice even more detached now. "You're free to go, but I suggest you keep a better eye on your son in the future. We don't tolerate any kind of theft in this store." His words cut through her like a blade, and for a moment, Danielle couldn't move, couldn't respond. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Theft? What theft? They had no evidence, no justification. But that didn't matter. They had made up their minds about her before she even entered the store. Her eyes narrowed as she met the male employee's gaze. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. "I was just here to buy a pair of shoes for my son. You have no right to treat me like this." The employee didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. It was as though he already saw her as guilty, as though her mere presence was an offense. Without another word, he turned on his heel and left the room, leaving Danielle standing there, her hands balled into fists at her sides. The woman behind the desk didn't even glance at her. There was nothing more to say. Danielle knew that this was over, but it wasn't over for her. This experience, this humiliation, would stay with her, lodged deep inside her chest, a constant reminder of the barriers she had to face every single day. She had come in for shoes, but she was leaving with something much heavier, the understanding that this world would always judge her, no matter how hard she tried to fight it. As she left the office, the weight of the encounter clung to her like a shadow. She returned to the store floor, where Caleb was waiting by the door, his wide eyes full of concern. "Mom, are you okay?" His small voice, filled with genuine worry, pierced through her armor of composure. Danielle knelt to meet his gaze, the anger still burning in her chest, but her love for him was stronger. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly as though she could shield him from everything that had just happened. "I'm fine, baby," she whispered, though the words felt hollow, and the fight was far from over. "Let's just get the shoes, okay?" As they walked out of the store, Caleb's hand in hers, Danielle's mind was already racing. This wasn't just about shoes. This wasn't just about an incident in a store. This was a fight that would follow her, that would follow Caleb, for the rest of their lives. Danielle's footsteps echoed off the polished floors of the shopping mall, each stride feeling heavier than the last. Caleb, his little hand wrapped securely around hers, stumbled slightly as he tried to keep up. His small fingers grasped her tighter, oblivious to the storm of emotions crashing inside her. Danielle's thoughts were a jumbled mess: frustration, anger, fear, and each one clawed at her from within, threatening to break through her carefully maintained composure. The fluorescent lights above flickered as they passed, the harsh, sterile glow amplifying the discomfort that had settled deep in her chest. She could still feel the sting of the confrontation back in the store, the way the woman's cold eyes had scrutinized her, the way her voice had been laced with judgment. Every word the woman had said felt like an accusation, an assumption cast upon her without any regard for who she truly was. Danielle tried to shake off the feeling, to push it out of her mind, but it clung to her like an unwanted shadow. She slowed her pace slightly, trying to collect herself, but every step felt like an eternity. Caleb, on the other hand, seemed untouched by the weight of the situation. He hummed softly to himself, his face bright with innocence and joy. The contrast between his carefree spirit and her inner turmoil was jarring. "Mom, can we go get ice cream?" Caleb asked, his voice light and hopeful, a playful tug at her heart. Danielle blinked, momentarily distracted by the sound of his voice. She glanced down at him, forcing a smile. "Sure, baby," she replied, her tone a little too cheerful, a little too forced. "Let's go get some ice cream." But as they neared the food court, Danielle's senses suddenly heightened. Something in the air shifted. She felt it before she even saw it, the prickle of unease crawling up her spine. Her eyes scanned the area quickly, searching for any sign of what was causing the discomfort settling in her chest. And then she saw them. Two figures, standing near the entrance of a nearby store. A man and a woman. The man was unfamiliar, but it was the woman who caught Danielle's attention. Her heart stopped, her breath catching in her throat. It was her. The same woman from the store. The one who had dismissed her so easily, who had never even considered her side of the story. The woman's gaze met Danielle's for the briefest of moments, and in that fleeting exchange, Danielle could feel the coldness emanating from her. The woman was standing with the man, their body language stiff, almost rehearsed. They weren't just standing there casually, they were waiting. Waiting for something. Danielle's stomach churned. The sensation of being watched, of being scrutinized, washed over her. A sense of dread gnawed at her insides, her mind racing with questions. What were they doing here? Why had they followed her? Her pulse quickened, her grip on Caleb's hand tightening involuntarily. Caleb, still oblivious to the tension in the air, looked up at her with a questioning glance. "Mom," he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Danielle forced herself to take a steadying breath, trying to push the panic down. She wasn't going to let this situation affect him. Not now. Not here. "Let's go this way, okay," she said, her voice steady but sharp, like a command. She gently pulled Caleb to the left, guiding him through the crowd, but her eyes never left the two figures standing in the distance. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That this wasn't over. They passed by several storefronts, Danielle's mind whirling with possibilities. Could they have been part of the store staff? Were they just doing their job? Or was this something more, something orchestrated? She didn't know, but one thing was clear: they were here for a reason. And that reason was most likely her. Trying to push the thought from her mind, she led Caleb to the counter to order the ice cream. The momentary distraction of watching her son's eager face as he picked out his favorite flavor helped calm her nerves. For a split second, it was like everything was normal again. But even as Caleb took his cone and wandered off to the tables, the feeling of being watched, of being trapped in some unseen web, clung to her like a second skin. Danielle's phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out, half expecting another call from her sister, but her heart skipped a beat when she saw the caller ID. It was a local news outlet. She had spoken to them just days earlier, giving an interview about the recent tensions in the city, but she hadn't expected them to reach out so soon. She quickly answered the phone, her throat tight. "Hello? Miss Carter, we need to speak with you. There's been an incident involving the store you were in earlier today. We need your side of the story." The reporter's voice came through the line, urgent and clipped. Danielle's stomach twisted into knots. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Her voice trembled slightly, despite her best efforts to sound calm. "There's footage of you being asked to leave the store. It's already circulating on social media. People are talking about it. It's causing a stir." Danielle felt the world tilt on its axis. Footage? Social media? How could this be happening so fast? How had everything escalated so quickly? She felt her pulse race, the panic rising in her chest like a tidal wave. I don't know what you mean. I don't. You need to make a statement, Ms. Carter. People are already forming opinions, and we think your side of the story could really make an impact." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Everything she had feared, everything she had tried to avoid, was coming to a head. The woman from the store, the footage, the media frenzy, it was all happening now, and Danielle had no control over it. She glanced down at Caleb, who was blissfully enjoying his ice cream, completely unaware of the storm gathering around them. Her heart broke for him. He deserved so much more than this, so much more than the harsh reality that was now crashing into their lives. She took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the phone tightly. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling in her mind. "But right now, I'm with my son. I need to take care of him first." The line went quiet for a moment, then the reporter's voice softened. "I understand, but don't wait too long, Miss Carter. This is already getting out of hand." Danielle hung up without another word, her mind reeling. She couldn't let the world control this narrative. Not this time. For Caleb's sake, for her own sake, she had to fight. She wasn't going to let this story define her, not when she hadn't even had a chance to speak for herself. As Caleb finished his ice cream, Danielle made a silent vow to herself. No matter what happened next, she would stand strong. She would speak her truth, even if the world was determined to drown it out. As they walked out of the mall, the weight of everything Danielle had been trying to ignore started to settle in, and she could feel the suffocating tension tighten around her chest. The noise from the parking lot, the distant hum of the city, felt like a dull background to the thoughts that screamed in her mind. Everything was spiraling out of control, one misstep, and it could all come crashing down. The phone call, the media storm, the sudden and unforgiving light that was shining down on her every move, it was all much bigger than anything she had expected. She had been thrust into this chaotic whirlwind without warning, and now, she realized there was no way out. No way to escape the suffocating grasp of scrutiny. Caleb's laughter, bright and innocent, cut through the heavy fog in Danielle's mind. He skipped along beside her, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their door. She forced a smile, trying to hold on to his carefree spirit, wishing she could trade places with him for just a moment. To feel that simple joy, that unburdened happiness that only a child could experience. His laughter was like a fleeting echo, fading too quickly as the weight of her reality pressed harder against her every step. "Mom, look! A dog!" Caleb pointed excitedly to a golden retriever trotting by with its owner, oblivious to the tension that hung in the air. Danielle glanced at the dog, its fur gleaming in the soft light, and for a brief second, she found herself lost in the simplicity of that image. The dog, without a care, was walking by, as if the world was right. As if there was no hate, no controversy, no looming darkness. "Yeah, sweetie. It's a nice dog," Danielle murmured, her voice strained but soft. Her eyes lingered on the dog for just a moment longer before she tore herself away, shaking the image from her mind. She couldn't afford to be distracted. Not now. The car ride home was quiet. Caleb, still caught up in his thoughts about tomorrow, asked her about ice cream flavors, cartoons, and what they might do over the weekend. But Danielle could hardly focus on his words. Each question felt like a reminder of how much she was failing at keeping her world intact. She was supposed to be the one to shield him from the ugliness of the world. She was supposed to keep him safe. But the walls were closing in, and she wasn't sure if she could keep up the facade much longer. She parked the car with mechanical precision, barely noticing the familiar surroundings. The apartment building loomed ahead like an old friend she no longer recognized. The place where she had found refuge, where she and Caleb had shared quiet evenings after a long day, was now a place she dreaded returning to. It was supposed to be their safe haven, their sanctuary from the chaos. But now, it felt like a cage, its walls closing in on her. "Mom, are we going to watch my cartoons now?" Caleb's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts, a simple request filled with innocent hope. He was already unbuckling his seatbelt, his little hands fumbling with the latch. Danielle's heart tightened in her chest. She didn't want to let him see the stress and fear consuming her. She didn't want him to feel the weight of everything that was happening. So, she forced a smile, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "Sure, sweetie. Let's go inside and get comfortable." They walked inside together, the door clicking shut behind them, and the moment the door closed, the silence swallowed them whole. Caleb made his way to the couch and plopped down in front of the TV, his small figure illuminated by the flickering screen. Danielle stood there for a moment, her body frozen, as she watched him. He was so carefree, so blissfully unaware of the danger that hovered just beyond their doorstep. She envied him. How easy it must be to be a child, to have no concept of the weight of the world bearing down on you. She shook herself from the trance, reaching into her bag to grab her phone. But as she pulled it out, a buzz from the screen caught her attention. It was a text from her sister, Mia. "Danielle, I just saw the footage. Are you okay? Do you need help?" The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She stared at the message for a long moment, her pulse quickening. There was no way Mia could fully understand what she was going through right now. No one could. Danielle was drowning in a sea of uncertainty, fighting to stay afloat. She needed to respond, needed to explain everything, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Not yet. It was too complicated, too raw. Her emotions were a mess, fear, anger, confusion, and she couldn't afford to show that weakness. Not when so much was on the line. Instead, she slipped the phone back into her bag, the decision to avoid responding weighing heavily on her. She couldn't let her emotions take over. She needed to be strong. She had no other choice. Danielle made her way to the living room, but her thoughts were racing again. The woman in the store, the way she had looked at her with such cold detachment, lingered in her mind. Danielle couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a simple altercation. That look, there was something behind it. A message, a warning, maybe even a threat. But why? Why had the woman acted so hostile? Was it personal? Or was there something else happening that she didn't understand? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more urgent than the last. But she had no answers, no solid ground to stand on. All she knew was that things were only going to get worse before they got better. Just as she was about to sit down next to Caleb, there was a knock on the door. It was soft, almost hesitant, but in the quiet of the apartment, it felt loud. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? Had the media already found her? Or was it someone else, someone from the store? Her breath caught in her throat as she stood up, her body tense and alert. She couldn't let anyone see her fear. She couldn't let anyone see how close to the edge she felt. She couldn't let Caleb see her unraveling. Taking a deep breath, she walked slowly to the door. Her hand hovered over the handle for a moment, the anxiety building inside her. She steadied herself, trying to calm the storm of thoughts crashing through her mind. When she opened the door, the last thing she expected to see was a man standing there, dressed in a dark suit. His face was serious, his posture rigid, and he held an envelope in his hand. There was a coldness about him that immediately set Danielle on edge. "Ms. Carter?" His voice was calm, but there was an underlying urgency to it. "I'm here on behalf of the store you visited earlier today. We need to talk." Danielle's stomach twisted. This wasn't good. She had hoped to avoid further confrontation, but now it was here, knocking at her door. Her mind raced as she tried to find the right words, the right way to respond. But all she could manage was a strained nod as she stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. "We need to talk." Danielle's breath caught in her throat as she saw the man step through the door. The way he moved, purposeful, almost mechanical, made the small space feel even more confining. His eyes scanned the room briefly, pausing for a moment longer than necessary on Caleb, who was lost in the glow of the TV screen. Then, with deliberate calm, he turned back to her, his eyes steely and unblinking. "Is your son home?" he asked in a voice that was flat, almost too formal. The question echoed in her head, and for a second, her mind scrambled. Why would he ask such a simple thing? But her protective instincts kicked in immediately, and without hesitation, she answered, her voice steady, though a little too controlled. "Yes, but he's busy. We can talk now." His lips barely twitched, as if this was what he had expected. Without a word, he handed her an envelope, thick, heavy, its weight pressing down on her like a reminder of something ominous she couldn't yet understand. Danielle's fingers brushed the cold, crisp paper, and a sudden shiver ran up her spine. Her first instinct was to rip it open right then, to tear away at whatever secrets lay within. But the sense of foreboding creeping through her veins made her hesitate. She couldn't allow herself to act impulsively. Not with Caleb in the other room. Not now. Forcing her eyes to meet his, Danielle stood there for a moment, her mind whirling with unspoken questions. "What is this?" she asked, her voice slightly strained, trying to remain calm. "What do you want from me?" The man remained silent for a beat, watching her with an unsettling intensity that made her feel as though he could see through her, dissecting her every thought. Then, with almost mechanical precision, he replied, "We've reviewed the footage of the store incident. There's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. The words hung in the air, chilling her to the core. Danielle's mind immediately flickered back to the store, how the woman had looked at her, the purposeful coldness in her eyes. This wasn't just some minor mistake. It was deliberate, calculated. But she couldn't let herself give in to the rising panic inside her. She had to stay composed, for herself, for Caleb. She steeled herself, meeting the man's gaze, forcing out the words. "Misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice colder now, betraying the uncertainty gnawing at her. "You're telling me the footage shows something different from what I saw?" The man nodded once, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes. but it's more complicated than that. I'm here to help you understand what's going on, but you need to listen carefully. This isn't just about a store incident, it's much bigger than that. Danielle's heart skipped a beat. A new layer of dread settled in her chest. Her hand tightened around the envelope, the paper crinkling beneath her fingers. "What do you mean bigger?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharper, her composure faltering. "What is this really about?" The man's gaze softened ever so slightly, though his voice remained cool. "You're involved in something you don't fully understand, Ms. Carter. I need your cooperation. We need to clear this up before it escalates further." "Escalates?" Danielle's stomach dropped. She felt the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. "What are you talking about? What could be worse than this?" The man sighed, the first sign of anything resembling frustration or impatience. "If you refuse to cooperate, things will get much worse. The footage, the accusations, everything becomes part of a much larger story that involves people you don't want to be tangled with. Trust me." Danielle's mind raced. The words were like a slow drip of poison, seeping deeper into her thoughts. What had she stepped into? What were these people capable of? Her fingers instinctively tightened around the envelope, but she didn't open it. Not yet. Not before she understood the full picture. There were too many unknowns. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling now despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "What do you want from me?" For a moment, the man didn't answer, as if weighing his words carefully. When he finally spoke, his tone was less formal but more ominous. "This is a legal matter, Miss Carter. You're being implicated in something larger than you realize. I'm here to offer you a way out, but you have to comply. You don't have much time to decide." Danielle felt her throat tighten. Legal? Was she being accused of something she didn't even know about? What could be so serious that it had to be dealt with in secrecy, with such an intimidating presence? The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing tighter, the air growing thicker. She had never felt more trapped in her life. Before she could respond, Caleb's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Mom, who is that?" Danielle turned quickly, her heart lurching in her chest. Caleb was still sitting on the couch, his innocent eyes watching the man at the door, a slight furrow on his brow. Her stomach churned with guilt. Caleb didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to see her like this, didn't deserve to be pulled into this nightmare. She needed to protect him, keep him safe from whatever storm was coming. She forced a smile, as reassuring as she could manage. "It's nothing, sweetie. Just a visitor. Go ahead and keep watching your show." But Caleb didn't seem convinced. His eyes remained locked on the stranger, his small hands clutching the edge of the couch. Danielle could see it, his innocent suspicion, the unease creeping in. "I said go ahead," she repeated more firmly, trying to dismiss the fear building in her son's eyes, though she couldn't help the tremor in her own voice. "It's okay." The man glanced at Caleb but said nothing. His expression remained unreadable, but Danielle could feel the weight of his gaze, the silent pressure building between them. She needed to get rid of him. She needed to end this conversation before Caleb was drawn further into this mess. "Please," Danielle said, her voice finally cracking under the strain, "I need to speak to you alone. This is between you and me." The man gave a stiff nod, stepping aside as she quickly closed the door behind her. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears as she leaned against the door, trying to steady herself. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something bigger, and she was already too deep into it to back out. Danielle took a deep breath, pressing her palm to her forehead. How had it come to this? What had she gotten herself into? She needed to protect Caleb. She needed to get them both out of whatever this was before it was too late. But as the man's cold, unwavering gaze lingered in her mind, she knew there was no easy escape. The truth was coming, and it was going to be far more devastating than she ever imagined. The footage went viral. The community was shaken. And Danielle, she didn't stay silent. What started as a painful moment turned into a national conversation. One woman, one child, stood against the weight of a broken system and refused to be crushed by it. But here's the truth, this isn't a one-time story. This happens every day. To strangers. To neighbors. To people you'll never see on camera. And unless we speak, unless we act, it will keep happening. Caleb may have walked out of that store with his mother, but what was stolen from him that day can't be returned. His innocence. His sense of safety. And yet, somehow, he still believes in a better world. So what about you? Will you look away? Or will you be part of the change? If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Challenge it. Because every view, every comment, every voice helps break the silence. This is not just a video. This is a call to action. And it starts with you.